I finally read Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab, and I do have some notes. The review of this is going to be mostly positive, but if you're considering whether or not you should read this, because it is a very big book, stick around and I will tell you my honest opinion. I feel like the tagline for this book really just spoke for itself in all the marketing. There isn't much more you need to say than toxic lesbian vampires. That hooked most people, and it certainly hooked me. Just take a moment for this absolutely beautiful edition that I got. This is the Fairy Loot one. So I got to read it for the first time in this gorgeous edition, and it made me very glad that I waited so long to get it, because I didn't get it when it originally came out. I only just got it recently. I'm not too sure why I waited so long, but I finally read it and I can't wait to talk about it. So, if you aren't aware, the book follows three women, one in the 1600s, one in the 1800s, and one in 2019. And it shows a little bit of their life before, but the main kind of pivot of their story is when they become vampires. The book has a plot that kind of connects all these characters. It definitely has, like a conclusion to it. However, I would say that this book felt a lot more like a character study than it did a traditional novel. Something was always happening to these characters, but I felt like the story and what you get from the story is about their personality, their behaviors, their kind of thoughts and feelings, as opposed to actual plot events that are happening. If you're a reader that goes off of voice and vibes and characters and behaviors and these really kind of intense and intimate studies of a character's mind, you will love this book. However, if you're somebody who prefers more fast paced, really plot heavy, and like plot progression and a good conclusion at the end, maybe this isn't your kind of thing. I ended up giving it 4 stars. It wasn't 100% perfect for me because I just felt like the rest of the book was so long and then the ending was so quick. And although I personally fell in love with the vibes and the voice and the characters, and I really enjoyed all the time I spent with these girls, a lot of it did feel maybe repetitive or a little bit drawn out and maybe sometimes unnecessary in areas. I feel like it should have either been that the whole lead up to the end was shortened down and a bit of the fat was trimmed off, and it was kind of, cut some of the unnecessary details so then the pace matched the ending, or the ending should have been stretched out into a much more. I don't really want to spoil the end, or I guess I'm going to get into spoiler territory anyway. So if you don't want spoilers, stop here. But I am going to have to kind of get into spoilers to properly discuss this book. I won't spoil too much, but the ending features all three of the witches matching in the same timeline. They finally come together and there's a plot to kill one of the other witches. It was just done so quickly. Like, the witch was defeated so quickly, even though there was hundreds and hundreds of pages of build up showing how strong she was becoming and how dark her mind was becoming and how like hard it was to face her and how much of a villain she was. And then in the end, her defeat was just very easy. I was a little bit bothered by how quickly her defeat was. However, I will say I wasn't a fan of who she was becoming in the end anyway. She was normal at the beginning. I loved her at the beginning. She was one of my favourite characters. And then there's a certain point in the book where she shifts and she becomes very dark and she kind of loses her humanity to her vampire side, which makes sense. Like, it was well done, but I loved her, so I was a bit hurt when she started to become a bit too irredeemable for me. I think in terms of an entire character arc, my favourite character is probably Charlotte, or Lottie, she's also called. I just feel like I loved her consistently throughout. Felt a lot of empathy to her decisions and to what she was going through. Her flaw that kind of leads to, the downfall of some women in her life. I really enjoyed that. I thought it was so good and it was very human, considering that she'd still become a vampire. It was a very human thing to her to keep hold of. The book is incredibly well written. V. Schwab can absolutely write. I don't think that's even part of the question. She can write very lyrical prose, very just beautiful prose, and she can really write well about profound meanings and explorations of life and death and freedom and love and things like that. Myself as a writer, that got me through it a lot, but I feel like if I didn't care much for the writing style, there would have been points in this book where it would have dragged. I would have perhaps not DNF'd it, but it would have taken me longer to get through. I'm going to start using my notes here because I just did all of that off the top of my head, so it was probably a load of shite. So the good things about this book, it was my first ever vampire book. This is the first vampire book I've read. I've watched vampire films, so I'm kind of familiar with vampire lore, but not entirely. I knew a few things, like they can't come in unless they're invited, which I only knew from Sinners. But I liked the way the vampire lore was kind of handled in this. I felt like it was good. I don't know how accurate it was, again, because I'm not very knowledgeable in it. But I liked the way it was kind of explained to us as readers without seeming too info dumpy. It just had great vibes. Like the atmosphere was so rich across this whole story, especially the stories of the girls from the 16 and 1800s. It was just so well written. You really got a feel of the time and the area, the locations. It takes place in many different locations, so I really enjoyed that. And then what I've got on my notes about the stuff that I disliked is basically just what I've said already, is the pacing in some point. The long pacing of the rest of the book didn't exactly justify how quick the ending was. I wasn't particularly satisfied with it, and though it doesn't taint my experience of it, I can't give it an 100%, 5-star rating, because I would have loved it a lot more if it had a slightly better ending. I did see a criticism of this book that I will say is very valid, and that is it does mostly rely on its vibes and its kind of words and these like profound thought processes rather than actual plot. Because, like I said, a lot of stuff does happen, but it does lean very heavily on these very deep ideas, and it does repeat them quite a lot throughout the book, which you're going to get because it's told over hundreds of years and you've got three women experiencing a very similar thing. However, I do agree that there were points where it was a little bit repetitive and it kind of dulled the impact of, like the first thing that was said. When it was said a couple more times, it was a bit like, I get it, but that is to be expected when it's like this kind of time travel. You're dealing with three different lives, they're gonna intertwine a lot. Overall, a really great book. I loved it. But if you are someone who prefers plot and proper traditional arcs, I don't know how you're going to get on with it. I would say just be very aware of that before you go in, that you are going to get bogged down in a lot of vibes and atmosphere and beautiful descriptions, but otherwise might not hold any significance for you. There are some really good moments. I loved how some of the vampires, like the women, interacted with other vampires in the world that weren't each other. I really did love that. I loved the way that vampires kind of tried to balance their love with humans, their love for humans with their greed for humans. Loved that. I mean, the sapphic elements in it are just beautiful. The way that the women prefer love in other women as opposed to men is just so clear, and it felt so good to read. So I personally loved it because I don't have a problem with vibes over plot, as long as the vibes are well written and do have substance, and it definitely does have substance. But if you kind of need to be carried through a story with a very intense plot, you might struggle with it a little bit. And it is a big commitment. It's like 530 pages or something, so it's definitely a big commitment. So I just wanted to make this video to say, if you don't have a lot of time and your time is valuable as a reader, I just wanted to make you aware of what this book entails, because it will certainly feel a lot longer than it takes to read if you don't get along with the amount of prose and the vibes. But if voice and vibes is your thing, then you will love it. You'll fly through it like I did. It didn't take me that long to read it. But I believe someone said that the audiobook was like 18 hours long. So I don't feel regret now that I've come out of it. I definitely feel a lot better. There's a lot that I've really connected with in that book. However, the ending, like, I don't feel as satisfied with their journey because of the ending. But there's a lot that I loved in their beginning, if that makes any sense. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.